Have you ever stopped to think about how many people around you are just pretending to be good? Diogenes of Swapi, a philosopher from the 4th century BC, had a pretty straightforward answer to that. Almost all of them. He lived in a barrel, despised social conventions, and had a simple mission to show how society as a whole was just one big theater of lies. This man walked through the streets of Athens with a lantern in broad daylight, saying he was looking for an honest man. Spoiler alert, he never found one. Diogenes wasn't just being provocative. He had discovered something that still makes people uncomfortable today. We live surrounded by people who wear masks of kindness, but inside they're completely different. Diogenes' cynical philosophy wasn't about being grumpy or negative. It was about having the courage to see reality as it really is without the pretty filters that society forces us to use. And this lesson has never been as relevant as it is today. How many smiles did you receive today that were completely fake? How many times did someone ask you, "How are you?" without really wanting to know the answer? We live in a society where politeness has become a theatrical performance, and we're all actors forced to play roles we didn't choose. Diogenes saw this with total clarity. For him, gestures of civility were like makeup. They only serve to hide people's true faces. When someone compliments you at work, are they being sincere or just following a social script? When a neighbor greets you with that big smile, are they showing real affection or just fulfilling a social obligation? The Greek philosopher had his own method for testing people's honesty. He would break all the etiquette rules on purpose. He'd eat on the street, sleep anywhere, say exactly what he thought. And you know what happened? People showed who they really were behind their polite masks. They got furious, uncomfortable, aggressive. Of course, not all politeness is fake. Some gestures of civility really do make coexistence easier and demonstrate genuine respect. But Diogenes teaches us to tell them apart. Real kindness doesn't disappear when nobody's watching, doesn't change based on convenience, doesn't need an audience to exist. Today, there's a new form of morality that Diogenes would certainly question. Political correctness turned into dogma. I'm not talking about respecting differences. That's always been important. I'm talking about when that respect becomes an empty ritual, a list of forbidden and approved words that you follow without thinking. Watch how some people talk. Every sentence seems to have gone through an internal filter, checking if it's aligned with the moral expectations of the moment. They don't express thoughts. They recite social catechisms. It's as if they've memorized a manual on how to be a good person but forgot to develop genuine goodness. Diogenes would say that this obsession with not offending is a sophisticated form of intellectual cowardice. When you're so afraid of thinking wrong, you stop thinking altogether. You prefer to repeat ready-made truths rather than discover your own convictions. And here's the paradox. A generation that constantly talks about authenticity but lives following pre-approved scripts. The most ironic thing is that this new moral orthodoxy has created its own fundamentalists. People who monitor every word others say, ready to punish any deviation from accepted doctrine. But does this constant surveillance produce better people or just more cautious people who've learned to hide their prejudices behind clean language? If you've ever felt bad about helping someone without photographing the moment, welcome to the 21st century. We live in an era where any act of kindness that isn't documented almost doesn't count as real kindness. It's as if generosity only exists when it has an audience. Diogenes lived in an age without cameras, but he perfectly understood this type of moral theater. For him, true generosity was almost invisible. Not because it was hidden, but because it didn't need to announce itself. When you do good to feel good about yourself, not to be seen as a good person, the motivation is completely different. Social media has created a strange economy of virtue. Every good deed can generate likes. Every cause embraced can earn followers. And this has contaminated even genuinely generous impulses. Now, many people choose their causes not for the real impact they can have, but for how much they'll improve their public image. But here's an interesting thought. Maybe some of these digital altruists really do transform in the process. Maybe starting with vanity, some end up developing real compassion. The question is Is it worth the risk of turning charity into performance? Diogenes would say no, but the ends don't justify corrupted means. Diogenes' followers were called cynics, a word that comes from dog in Greek, and this wasn't an insult. It was an ideal because dogs have an honesty that we lose in adult life. They don't fake emotions, they don't feel, don't hide basic needs, aren't ashamed of being who they are. Diogenes chose to live like a philosophical dog. He slept when he was sleepy, ate when he was hungry, spoke what he thought without diplomatic filters. To the Athenian elite, this was scandalous. To him, it was pure freedom. He had discovered that most of our prisons are self-imposed. Picture the scene. A man who gave up home, fine clothes, social status, and seemed happier than any successful citizen of Athens. This was disturbing because it showed a troubling truth. Maybe all that effort to impress others was completely unnecessary. Of course, not everyone can or should live like Diogenes lived. We have real responsibilities, people who depend on us, projects that require stability. But we can apply his wisdom in an adapted way. Question which social conventions really serve our well-being and which are just golden prisons we accept without thinking. The lesson isn't to abandon everything, but to consciously choose what's worth keeping in our lives, and to have the courage to discard what only serves to impress people who might not even really care about us. Here's a thought that might make you uncomfortable. Do you have the courage to be good in an imperfect way? Because there's a huge difference between polite goodness and courageous goodness. The first never bothers anyone. The second sometimes needs to bother people to be effective. Diogenes was kind, but in a way that many people would consider rude. He helped people by pointing out their illusions directly and sometimes brutally. He didn't use soft words or diplomatic methods. He believed that sometimes the truth hurt less when it came fast, like ripping off a Band-Aid all at once. Our society has created a very polite type of kindness that avoids conflicts, never confronts, prefers to omit difficult truths rather than hurt feelings. It's a safe kindness that guarantees you'll always be seen as a nice person. But is it really effective? Sometimes being truly good requires the courage to disappoint expectations. To say no when everyone expects you to say yes. To confront destructive behaviors in people you love. To choose honesty instead of superficial harmony. This doesn't mean being cruel or insensitive. It means understanding that real goodness sometimes has thorns, that true love can include difficult moments, that helping someone doesn't always mean giving that person what they want to hear. How many of your friends would still be around if you stopped being convenient? If you stopped agreeing with everything, being always available, always positive, and pleasant? Diogenes constantly ran this test and discovered interesting things about human nature. Most of our social relationships work like a system of implicit exchanges. You make me feel important. I make you feel special. You validate my choices. I validate your. You don't question my obvious flaws. I ignore yours. It's a silent pact of mutual convenience. But Diogenes preferred honest solitude to fake company. For him, it was better to be alone being truthful than surrounded by people having to pretend. And this radical choice gave him a unique perspective on human relationships. He could identify who approached out of interest and who had genuine affection. The truth is that many of us tolerate superficial friendships because we're afraid of loneliness. We prefer mediocre company to no company. But there's a big difference between being alone and being abandoned. Diogenes was alone by choice but never really abandoned. He had his own company and had learned to like it. This doesn't mean we should discard all imperfect friendships. It means learning to value those rare relationships where you can be completely honest without fear of being rejected. Walk through any urban center today and you'll see something Diogenes would recognize immediately. A big stage where everyone plays idealized versions of themselves. Each person is simultaneously actor and audience in their own life show. Some pretend to be richer by buying things they can't afford. Others pretend to be happier by posting only the good moments. Some pretend to be wiser by repeating ready-made phrases about personal development. It's a collective theater where nobody admits they're performing. Diogenes chose to exit this play completely. He refused both the role of actor and audience. And this refusal gave him a privileged view. He could see the artificiality that the participants themselves couldn't see because they were too busy sustaining their own performances. But here's an interesting counterpoint. Maybe some of these performances have value. Maybe pretending to be better than we are sometimes motivates us to actually improve. Maybe aspiring to an idealized version of ourselves is a form of growth, even if it starts artificially. The question is finding the balance between healthy aspiration and neurotic theater, between wanting to genuinely improve and just wanting to look better. Diogenes teaches us that the difference lies in motivation. Do you want to grow for yourself or for others' approval? There's a type of person that Diogenes particularly hated. The one who mastered the art of sounding smart without really knowing what they're talking about. These are people who learned all the social codes, who know exactly what opinion to have about each subject, who speak eloquently about topics they've only studied superficially. They represent a sophisticated form of intellectual dishonesty because they use social intelligence not to genuinely connect with other people, but to build an image of competence and wisdom. They're like permanent politicians, always campaigning for their own reputation. Diogenes, on the contrary, took pride in admitting ignorance. When he didn't know something, he clearly said he didn't know. When he didn't understand, he asked simple, direct questions. For him, faking knowledge was a form of cowardice. It showed fear of seeming ordinary or limited. Our era has amplified this problem. With infinite information available, many people think that having access to data is the same as having wisdom. They confuse the ability to Google with real knowledge, the skill of repeating information with genuine understanding. But there's a liberating irony in this. When you stop trying to impress with your intelligence, you can start using it more effectively. When you don't need to prove you know everything, you can focus on learning what really matters. And this paradoxically makes you wiser than any intellectual performance. Diogenes had only a cloak and slept wherever night fell. When he saw a boy drinking water straight from the fountain with his hands, he threw away his only cup, realizing that even that was dispensable. For him, each object less meant 1 degree more of freedom. Today, we do exactly the opposite. We complicate basic needs until they become sophisticated rituals. We don't drink water. We hydrate with special beverages. We don't eat food. We have gastronomic experiences. We don't wear clothes. We express identity through fashion. This forced sophistication is a subtle form of slavery, because when you need specific things to feel good, you become dependent on those things. Your happiness becomes hostage to the availability of products, services, special experiences. Diogenes discovered something revolutionary. When you learn to be satisfied with the basics, you gain a freedom that no millionaire possesses. You can be happy anywhere, with anything, independent of external circumstances. This doesn't mean embracing poverty out of masochism. It means questioning how many of our needs are really necessary and how many are just sophisticated addictions we created to feel different or special. The word cynic has become almost a curse word today. When someone is called cynical, it usually means the person is bitter, hopeless, overly critical. But Diogenes' original cynicism was exactly the opposite. It was a form of mental cleansing, emotional hygiene against collective illusions. Being cynical in the Diogenes sense means having the courage to see through social performances. It means saying the emperor has no clothes when everyone pretends to see magnificent robes. It means questioning consensuses that might just be shared fears. We live in an era that desperately needs this cleansing. We're drowning in contradictory information, surrounded by experts in everything, bombarded by absolute truths that change from week to week. We need the cynical capacity to doubt, question, ask for evidence. But Diogenes' cynicism had something that modern cynicism has lost: hope. He criticized society because he believed people could be better. He pointed out hypocrisies because he wanted to help others free themselves from them. His harshness came from love, not contempt. Sick cynicism is the kind that criticizes without proposing alternatives, that points out problems without believing in solutions. Healthy cynicism is the kind that clears illusions to make room for better truths. One of the most absurd pressures of modern life is the obligation to have an opinion about everything. If a tragedy happens on the other side of the world, you need to take a position. If a controversy arises on social media, you need to choose a side. If someone close goes through difficulties, you need to demonstrate adequate empathy. Diogenes knew that sometimes honesty requires silence. When you don't know a situation deeply, when you have no real connection to certain pain, faking feelings is just another lie. It's more honest to admit limitations than to manufacture instant compassion. The emotional inflation of social media has turned genuine feelings into mandatory performances. Everyone needs to always be sensitized, always touched, always emotionally engaged. But real feelings don't work like that. They're selective, personal, impossible to force. There's something deeply false about people who demonstrate the same emotional intensity for personal tragedies and trending topics, who cry equally for the death of a relative and for a cause they discovered on Instagram. This emotional equivalence isn't sensitivity. It's the opposite of it. Diogenes chose his battles. He cared deeply about some things and completely ignored others. And there was beauty in this selectivity because it showed that his feelings were real, not manufactured for public consumption. In the end, Diogenes puts us before a choice that defines every human life. Do you want to be free, or do you want to be approved? Because often these two things are incompatible, and you need to choose which is more important. Social approval has clear rules and guaranteed rewards. Be polite, positive, inclusive, empathetic. Support the right causes. Speak the appropriate words. Demonstrate the expected feelings. It's a safe path to being accepted and loved by most people. But real freedom sometimes requires that you disappoint expectations, that you disagree when everyone agrees, that you choose truth instead of diplomacy, that you say no when they expect you to say yes. And this can make you seem difficult, complicated, inadequate. Diogenes made his choice more than 2,000 years ago. He preferred to be free and misunderstood rather than accepted and false. And this decision gave him something that most people search for their entire lives without finding genuine inner peace. Because when you no longer need others' approval to feel valid, when your choices come from internal convictions and not external pressures, you gain a tranquility that no popularity can offer. True goodness can only exist when it springs from free choice made by someone who knows their own shadows and still decides to do good. Without this freedom, all virtue is suspect. It might just be well-trained obedience, fear transformed into morality. In the end, being free might be the only real way to be good.